There is a lot of rather murky analysis, a lot of consensus, and a lot of discussion about hate out there today, 2024, nearly 25. Is this hate rooted in envy? That was the general idea after 9/11. I remember that. The idea leaves a lot of hairs in place, reassures almost, proves we are right. Well, the door closed in the last election. I think it was never really open. We didn't really think they were jealous. We imagined instead a horrible belief system that just hates. Maybe this is true. It has been true of our belief system in the past. Some smart people will say it never went away, just morphed. I don't know. Nevertheless, why not therefore of them? Perhaps we changed and now walk the high road. I don't know and can't pretend to, but I found a curious thing in Henry V, the play. Huge favorite of mine. I'm not sure why it's a favorite, but it often happens to me with these plays that it takes a little while to discover the why, as if I feel it instinctively and find out why later after sitting in it a while. It's a pity, but it usually happens after you've played the part. The light does not shine on your first or even third attempt. After the little touch of Harry in the night when Henry V walks among the troops the night before the battle in disguise to see what their feelings are, he says that he's left alone on stage after quite a few contentious discussions with his crew. And he stops and says, "Upon the king, let us our lives, our souls, our debts, our careful wives, our children, and our sins lay on the king. We must bear all, O hard condition, twin born with greatness, subject to the breath of every fool whose sense no more can feel but his own wringing. What infinite heart's ease must kings neglect that private men enjoy? And what have kings that privates have not too, save ceremony? Save general ceremony. And what art thou, thou idle ceremony? What kind of God art thou that sufferest more of mortal griefs than do thy worshippers? What are thy rents? What are thy comings in? O ceremony, show me but thy worth. What is thy soul of adoration? Art thou aught else but place, degree, and form, creating awe and fear in other men, wherein thou art less happy, being feared than they in fearing? What drink'st thou oft instead of homage sweet, but poisoned flattery? O be sick of greatness, and bid thy ceremony give thee cure. Think'st thou the fiery fever will go out with titles blown from adulation? Will it give place to flexure and low bending? Canst thou, when thou commandst the beggar's knee, command the health of it? No, thou proud dream that play'st so subtly with the king's repose. I am a king that find thee, and I know 'tis not the balm, the sceptre and the ball, the sword, the mace, the crown imperial, the intertissued robe of gold and pearl, the farced title running for the king, the throne he sits on, nor the tide of pomp that beats upon the high shore of this world. No, not all these thrice gorgeous ceremony, not all these laid in bed majestical can sleep so soundly as the wretched slave, who with a body filled and vacant mind gets him to rest crammed with distressful bread. Never sees horrid night, the child of hell, but like a lackey from the rise to set sweats in the eye of Phoebus, and all night sleeps in Elysium. Next day after dawn doth rise and help Hyperion to his horse, and follows so the ever-running year with profitable labour to his grave. And but for ceremony, such a wretch, winding up days with toil and nights with sleep, had the forehand advantage of a king. The slave, a member of the country's peace, enjoys it, but in gross brain little wots what watch the king keeps to maintain the peace, whose hours the peasant best advantages. O lucky peasant, says the king, I am the one who takes care of him. That is not an analogy for today, dears. That is not our ruling class. They do not think that way at all. Henry feels the terrible weight of being king. Heavy hangs the head. It's an interesting, long, thoughtful thing to say in the middle of a war. I've worked the other speeches, the more famous ones, once more unto the breach in St. Crispin's Day. Great heroic stuff, possibly made more exciting than when we know how scared he is himself. I think, is he scared himself of dying? I'm not sure that he's scared himself of dying. He had a terrible, terrible wound that happened in a big battle in Scotland that occurs, I think, in Henry IV, Part 1. He had an arrow that went in here and went to the back of his skull, and it had to be removed incredibly slowly by some fantastic physician of the day. Imagine. I think he is an archetype we might be wary of. A warrior who perhaps is in touch with the tiger, who lends the eye a terrible aspect. So he knows he can go brutal, maybe even berserk. He knows the transformation that battle can wrought, hand-to-hand, sword-swinging battle. But this speech made me think of something else. Envy of the simple man without responsibility. It may be in this moment he really is resentful. He does know he will likely be ransomed if captured, which they'll not be. It is typically Shakespeare, rather like "Hath not a Jew eyes," a speech of Shylock, a sudden turn away from the obvious, the plot, like Shakespeare had an instinct he couldn't leave out. Here perhaps he is expressing the attitude of the ruling class of yore. It was of yore even to Shakespeare. He is as close to Henry as we are to Lincoln, to the peasants they ruled. He's just walked among the troops and talked to some of them in disguise. I saw a recent film of a production where this was done so well. The Nims and Fluellens were rough but dignified instead of simple and funny, the convention. They had some very cogent things to say and provoke this great speech. It's one of the great things about post, Occupy Wall Street Shakespeare is that suddenly this snobbery is questioned. Now jump a few centuries to now, like a chorus, our present powerful. Our present powerful, our ruling class, which is there, unfortunately. Unfortunate because Henry V is a propaganda fiction of a type we don't have anymore, at least not in power, in absolute power. There's no job today like Alexander the Great. You couldn't run for president of the United States as a Henry V. You could try, maybe John Kennedy, but I'm not sure. This is a good thing, except we no longer have Alexander. It's also a good thing, but we miss him. We miss Henry. I do. And maybe there is a way to manifest what was great about them without the battlefields. There's the rub. Our powerful are getting more and more kingly and queenly in their own minds, at least, as time goes on. I wonder if there is a bit of Henry in them, in their attitude to the peasants, without the encounters in the night, without which you cannot make the speech. There is no little touch of Pelosi in the night, people. History has seemed to me, when I read it and watched documentaries, to be Henry heavy. What he does is important. What the powerful do today fills the news. What they said, who they love, what they eat, the lifestyles of the rich and famous. What's his name's latest yacht. Whether or not they deserve any of this attention is moot. But there is an assumption that they are the important ones, the ones we aspire to be, perhaps. Any Bezos, that's the one that we're always looking at his bloody yachts. Any coverage of the Spanish Armada does not focus on the gunner on Drake's ship or Raleigh's armourer, though the reader may be a gunner or armourer. They are important only to themselves. Things have changed, I hope, or tried to. While the significance and virtue of monarchs is pretty overdone by us who don't have them in investiture, we seem to need to put that mythology somewhere. The great and the good, the best and the brightest, two concepts I just find so repulsive, and find no evidence for. Wisdom, in my own experience, comes from high and low. each of equal significance. The one has not been listened to, and we could start, we'd find out some really seriously interesting stuff, but the one that flows from on high is heeded exclusively. I'd root so many contemporary social problems in that selectivity that I could write a book of them. The kings of Shakespeare and the history of England were all defined by the wars they were fighting or avoiding. Some of them are ambitious scumbags, Richard III, Macbeth, some not equal to the task of ruling. Oh God, let's see, Henry VI, Richard II. They are not brutal enough, Shakespeare seems to say, or too brutal. Some struggle with the whole notion of being king, ruler. The warrior just gets on with it. It's lucky for him. Henry V of the lot seems to be the best suited to the job of warrior. But Shakespeare and we treat them all as not like ourselves. Not one of them ever says, well, why don't I just go off and do a bit of farming, give up the rest for a quiet life? I'm pretty sure that one would be very harshly judged by Shakespeare if they did do that. But Henry is flirting with the possibility here in this speech, like Achilles did. He's putting it out there. The voices of the rest of humanity are seldom heard in Shakespeare, except in snatches. I don't say this as a communist revolutionary. It is probably natural. We do the same with movies. There's not much about George Clooney's Chauffeur, but the parts can be played vividly, as in the one I saw, the Henry I saw, can shed a light, can in fact make us wish to be them rather than he. And as I remember, they are not distressful slaves. Kit Harington plays Henry. It's on the National Theatre at home. Maybe these voices want to be heard. Maybe it is the promise of democracy demanding an audience at last. Maybe it is just a roar of rage. Maybe the sham of pushing a button every 2 years as participation is finally exposed. We must know all this, but something stops us. Do we imagine, as Henry does, that the perspective of the ordinary bloke is so different from ours that they cannot be trusted to vote in their own interest? That we know better than they what that is? God. But more than all, might it be that the powerful and wealthy are not happy being king and want to be crammed with distressful bread? That all lives but mine are a holiday, they seem to say. Henry seems to say, okay, I've had my little peeve, then I'll go off to fight and die or be ransomed for England and St. George. Do his duty, prove his worth. That will be challenged by himself also in the play. He doesn't go all Coriolanus either. That's always an option, a very Elizabethan option. He has a job to do. They need him and he needs them. It is maybe useful to reflect that it is the middle-class hero that hates the royals in England. Often the working class doesn't. This may be more than stupidity, dear American intellectual. But when one no longer needs the other, except maybe the once every 2 years, the present-day Henrys might say they are just deplorables. They are only jealous of me and my greater birth, brain, education, earning power, what have you. This is above all why I love the Kit Henry, directed, by the way, by Max Webster. Interesting. Anyway, all this is what I encountered of hate during recent years in my 2 Western homes. It is mutual for both sides. Henry is jealous of the freedoms of the ordinaries, he imagines, and they of he, thinking he will be ransomed for all his protests. What the plays do, is freight both sides with truth. Only Pistol has no long speech alone on stage. For that, we have to wait for Bertolt Brecht.